He expected a Chinese wife for Christmas, but not the skill that saved his ranch from ruin. The year was 1889, and winter had descended upon the Montana Territory with a vengeance that frightened even the oldest settlers. It was not merely a season, it was a siege. Snow fell in thick, suffocating curtains across the plains, burying fence lines, bowing the spines of ancient pines, and swallowing the world in a silence so profound it felt heavy on the eardrums. December was creeping toward Christmas, but there was no joy in the approach, only the biting dread of another freeze. The Ironwood Ridge Ranch, once the crown jewel of the valley, celebrated for its sturdy barns and endless rolling pastures, now lay groaning under the weight of debt and ice. It struggled like a dying animal, its breath shallow, its heartbeat fading with every falling flake. Arthur Thorne stood on the porch of the main house, a man of 36 years who looked 50. The cold wind bit at his exposed face, but he hardly felt it, the numbness inside him was far deeper. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered but gaunt, his eyes the color of flint and just as hard. He stared out at the endless expanse of white, his breath hanging in the frigid air like the ghosts of memories he wished he could excise from his mind. His father had passed 2 winters ago, and his mother followed the very next spring, leaving Arthur alone to manage a legacy that was crumbling into dust. The loneliness was a physical thing, a sharp ache in the center of his chest that hurt more than the frostbite threatening his fingers. That pervasive isolation was the reason why, 3 months prior, he had swallowed his pride and written a letter to a marriage broker in San Francisco. He had not written for passion. He had not written for romance, nor for a beauty who would turn heads in town. Arthur had written for survival. He asked for a companion, specifically a Chinese woman, having heard they were industrious, quiet, and loyal. He expected a gentle soul, someone who would keep the fire lit, mend his torn shirts, cook a hot meal, and perhaps, in time, help him raise a family to fill the empty rooms of the farmhouse. He expected someone grateful for a roof over her head, someone who would shrink behind him when the world got loud. He did not expect skill. He did not expect fire. And he certainly did not expect the vision that stepped off the stagecoach that Tuesday afternoon. The town of Black Creek was buried under 2 feet of fresh powder, the wooden boardwalk slick with ice. The stagecoach horses blew steam from their nostrils as the driver tossed a single, battered leather trunk onto the snow. Then, the door opened. A woman stepped out, and for a moment, the grey, monochrome world of the frontier seemed to shatter. She was not huddled in drab wool or grey cotton like the other women of the territory. Mai Lin stood tall, wrapped in a heavy coat which she momentarily parted to adjust her luggage, revealing a flash of a traditional red cheongsam, the silk embroidered with gold thread that caught the meager winter light. It was a defiant splash of color against the blinding white, a symbol of luck and life in a land that felt dead. She wore a heavy bonnet, but beneath it, her face was striking, not submissive, but sharp. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the town not with fear, but with the calculation of a hawk searching for movement in the grass. She looked at the gawking townsfolk, then at the dilapidated buildings, and finally, her gaze landed on Arthur. He had assumed she would be trembling, terrified of the harsh landscape and the stranger she was to marry. Instead, she walked toward him, her boots crunching decisively in the snow. "Arthur Thorne?" she asked. Her English was accented but crisp, her voice steady despite the biting wind that whipped around them. "I am," Arthur replied, his voice rusty from days of disuse. He felt a sudden, clumsy awkwardness. He was unwashed, smelling of horse sweat and wood smoke, while she looked like a porcelain doll that had somehow armed itself for war. "You must be Mai Lin." "I am Mai Lin," she confirmed. She didn't curtsy. She didn't look at her feet. She met his gaze squarely. "The letter said you have a wagon." Arthur blinked, taken aback. Yes. It's this way." He reached for her trunk, expecting it to be light, filled only with silk and trinkets. Instead, his arms strained under the weight. It was incredibly heavy, dense as a box of stones. He grunted, hoisting it onto his shoulder. Mai Lin watched him, not with gratitude, but with a critical eye, as if measuring his strength. "Books?" Arthur grunted as he heaved it into the back of the wagon. "Essentials," she replied cryptically. As they climbed onto the wagon bench, the townspeople of Black Creek stopped to watch. Men paused in their shoveling, women peered through frosted glass. In 1889, a white rancher bringing home a Chinese bride was enough to fuel gossip for a decade. The whispers were audible, sharp and cruel, carried on the wind. Bought her, someone sneered. Look at that red dress, like a heathen, another whispered. Arthur stiffened, his jaw clenching. He reached for the reins, ready to shout them down, but he felt a gloved hand touch his arm. He looked at Mai Lin. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at the horizon, her expression serene, almost bored by the display of ignorance. The wind is picking up, she said calmly. We should beat the storm. She hadn't acknowledged the insults. She had dismissed them as beneath her notice. Arthur felt a strange twist in his gut, not pity, but a flicker of respect. He snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward, pulling them away from civilization and into the desolate white openness of the plains. The ride to Ironwood Ridge was long and brutal. The silence between them was louder than the howling wind. Arthur struggled to form words. He had rehearsed a speech, a welcome, a set of rules, but it all died in his throat in the presence of her quiet intensity. Finally, Mai Lin spoke. Your letter said the ranch was large. But it did not say it was prosperous. Arthur winced. It was. Once. The winters have been hard. The market. Difficult. And you asked for a wife, she stated, not asking. I did. To cook? To clean. To share a life, Arthur corrected, though he knew the domestic duties were what he had envisioned. A ranch needs a woman's touch. Mai Lin turned to him, her eyes narrowing slightly against the snow glare. A ranch needs more than a touch, Mr. Thorne. It needs a spine. And from the look of these fences, she gestured to a broken rail half buried in a drift as they turned onto his property, yours is fractured. Arthur flushed with irritation. I didn't bring you here to criticize my fences, Mai Lin. No, she replied smoothly. You brought me here to help. I cannot help if I am blind to the truth. When the ranch house finally came into view, it was a bleak sight. The roof bowed under the snow, the chimney released a thin, pathetic trail of smoke, and the barn leaned precariously to the left, looking like an old drunkard trying to stay upright. The corral was empty save for the two plough horses they were driving. Mai Lin climbed down before Arthur could offer a hand. She didn't go to the house. She walked straight toward the barn. Where are you going? Arthur called out, securing the brake. The house is warm. Or warmer than here. The horses, she said, her voice carrying over the wind. How many? 14, Arthur shouted back, confused. Had 52 years ago. Winter took the rest. She nodded, not with sympathy, but with a grim sort of accounting. She disappeared into the dark, cavernous mouth of the barn. Arthur stood in the snow, bewildered. He had expected her to run to the hearth, to complain about the cold. Instead, she was inspecting his livestock. He followed her inside. The barn was dim, smelling of moldy hay and manure. The wind rattled the loose boards, creating a rhythmic clattering that usually set the horses on edge. But as Arthur entered, he saw Mai Lin moving between the stalls. She had removed her heavy gloves. Her hands, pale and slender, were running along the flank of his prize stallion, a jet-black beast named Obsidian. Obsidian was known to bite strangers, yet he stood frozen, his head lowered, as Mai Lin murmured something in a language Arthur didn't understand. It sounded musical, tonal, and calming. He has bad hooves, she said without turning around. Thrush in the left hind. And he is underfed. I feed them what I can afford, Arthur snapped, his pride stinging. Hay is 5 cents a bale and scarce. Mai Lin turned, her red cheongsam shimmering in the gloom like a dying ember. Then you are feeding them wrong. You are feeding them like plough horses, not like runners. Runners. Arthur scoffed. These are work horses. Marshland stock. Good for pulling and plowing, nothing more. My Lin walked over to him, her height significantly less than his, yet she seemed to tower over him in presence. Is that what you think you have? It's what my father bred. Heavy bone, thick coat. Your father bred for endurance, she corrected. But the lines. I see the arch of the neck. The depth of the chest. She pointed to an old mare in the corner. That mare. She is not just marshland. She has Akhal-Teke blood. Ancient lineage. Fast. Tireless. Arthur stared at her. What would a woman from the city know of Akhal-Teke blood? My Lin's expression tightened. My father was not a laundryman, Mr. Thorne. In China, he was a master of the imperial stables. We fled the wars to California, and there, he managed the racing studs for the railroad barons. I did not grow up with dolls. I grew up in the saddle. I know a diamond when I see it covered in mud. Arthur was silenced. The revelation hung in the cold air. He had expected a cook. He had been sent a master horseman. Show me the books, she demanded softly. That is private, Arthur bristled. A wife does not. A partner does, she cut him off. How much debt? Arthur looked at the ground, shamed. $15,000. The bank forecloses in April if I don't pay the interest. My Lin didn't flinch. She simply nodded. Then we have until April to turn these plow horses into gold. The days that followed were carved from ice and desperation, but within them, a stubborn flame began to grow between Arthur and My Lin. It was not the romance of storybooks, it was a bond forged in labor. My Lin took over the house, yes, the kitchen was suddenly organized, the meals, though simple, were seasoned with herbs she had brought in her trunk that made the meager venison taste rich, but her true home was the barn. She woke before Arthur, braiding her long black hair tight against her head, donning men's trousers she had reshaped to fit her frame, and heading out into the pre-dawn dark. Arthur watched her through the frost-coated windows, fascinated and terrified. She worked harder than any hand he had ever hired. She charted breeding schedules on the back of unpaid bills. She mixed poultices from dried roots to treat the horses' hooves. She spent hours in the stalls, grooming the animals until their dull coats began to gleam despite the poor diet. One morning, during a blizzard that turned the world into a swirling vortex of white, Arthur found her in the stall with Obsidian. She was wrapping the stallion's legs with strips of old wool. You'll freeze to death out here, Arthur shouted over the wind rattling the roof. He needs warmth for the tendons, she replied calmly. If we want to sell him as a stud, he must move like water, not like a stiff old man. Arthur grabbed a pitchfork and began mucking the stall next to her. Sell him? No one in the territory has money for a stud like him. They want plow horses. We are not selling to the territory, My Lin said, standing up and wiping her brow. We are selling to the future. That night, by the light of a flickering kerosene lamp, My Lin laid out her plan. She had drawn a map of the surrounding counties. The snow is deep, but the rich ranchers in the valley, the ones who own the mines, they are bored. They have money, and they want prestige. They want horses that can race, horses that look like kings. She tapped the paper. We breed the mares now. We sell the futures on the foals. We take deposits. And we sell Obsidian service. No one buys a foal that isn't born, Arthur argued, rubbing his temples. It's madness. It is speculation, My Lin corrected. And it is how the wealthy stay wealthy. We must convince them that Ironwood Ridge has a secret bloodline. A royal bloodline. She looked at him, her eyes fierce in the candlelight. You must trust me, Arthur. You know how to work the land. But I know how to work the pride of men. Arthur looked at her. He saw the fatigue under her eyes, the redness of her hands from the cold work. She was fighting for his ranch, her home now, with a ferocity that humbled him. Okay, he whispered. We try. The campaign began the next week. The snow was waist deep, but they hitched the strongest horses to the sleigh. Arthur drove, while My Lin sat beside him, dressed not in work clothes, but in her red cheongsam, wrapped in furs. She looked like a visiting queen. They traveled to the Doublebar Ranch, owned by a skeptic named Samuel Vance. Vance was a hard man who laughed when Arthur explained they were selling breeding rights. "You want me to pay for air?" Vance guffawed, spitting tobacco into the snow. "Arthur, you've gone soft in the head. And letting a woman run your business." He sneered at Mai Lin. Mai Lin stepped forward. She didn't speak to Vance. She walked to Vance's own horse, a patchy gelding tied to the rail. She ran her hand down its neck and whispered, "This horse is lame in the shoulder. You ride him too hard on the left lead." Vance stopped laughing. "How the devil did you know that?" "Because I know horses," she said, her voice ringing clear. "And I know that the stallion we have at Ironwood Ridge can sire a foal that will run circles around anything you own. A foal that will make the Doublebar famous in Denver and San Francisco. Or," she shrugged elegantly, "you can keep riding lame geldings." Vance stared at her. The silence stretched. Then, he reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. "I want first pick of the spring drop." They rode from ranch to ranch. The reception was always the same, a mockery, then curiosity, then awe. Mai Lin's knowledge was undeniable. She spoke of lineage and genetics with a scientific precision that baffled and impressed the rough cattlemen. She sold them a dream of speed and elegance. By the time they turned back toward Ironwood Ridge, Arthur's coat pocket was heavy with deposit slips and gold coins. But the winter was not done with them. 2 days before Christmas, the temperature plummeted to 30 degrees below zero. The wind screamed like a banshee. In the middle of the night, a loud crack echoed through the ranch. Arthur and Mai Lin bolted upright in bed. "The barn," Arthur gasped. They threw on their coats and rushed into the blinding storm. The heavy snow had snapped a main beam in the barn roof. It hung precariously, threatening to collapse the entire structure and crush the animals inside. The horses were panicked, screaming in fear. "We have to get them out," Arthur yelled, grabbing a halter. "No," Mai Lin shouted, grabbing his arm. "If we turn them out into this storm, they will freeze in an hour. We must shore up the beam. It's too heavy. We use the jacks," Mai Lin commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "The wagon jacks. Get them." For 3 hours, they fought the building. Arthur, muscles screaming, cranked the heavy iron jacks while Mai Lin jammed timber supports into place. She climbed into the rafters, risking her life as the wood groaned and splintered around her, guiding Arthur's placement. She was fearless, moving with the agility of a cat, shouting orders that Arthur followed without hesitation. He wasn't the boss, he was the hands, and she was the mind. Finally, the beam held. The groaning stopped. The roof was secure. They collapsed into the hay, chests heaving, covered in sawdust and snow. The horses settled, their warm breath filling the air. Arthur looked at Mai Lin. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair wild, her hands bleeding from splinters. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "You saved them," Arthur breathed. "We saved them," she corrected, breathless. Arthur reached out and took her hand. It was rough, calloused, just like his. "I sent for a wife," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I thought I needed someone to cook my meals. I was a fool." Mai Lin looked at him, her dark eyes softening. "And what do you need now, Arthur?" "A partner," he said. "A general. I don't know if I can save this place alone." "You are not alone," she whispered. "You have the Ghost Wind bloodline now. And you have me." Christmas Eve arrived with a calm, crystal-clear sky. The storm had broken. The world was a glittering diamond of ice. Inside the ranch house, the fire roared. The table was covered not with unpaid bills, but with a modest feast, roasted pheasant and dumplings Mai Lin had made. Arthur sat at the head of the table, but he didn't feel like the master of a dying ship anymore. He felt like a man with a future. He looked at the safe in the corner, where enough money sat to pay the bank's interest and buy feed until spring. The foals coming in April were already sold. The reputation of Ironwood Ridge was growing before the grass even turned green. He looked at Mai Lin. She was wearing her red cheongsam again, her hair pinned up with a comb he had found in his mother's jewelry box and given to her that morning. "Thank you," Arthur said, breaking the silence. "For the dinner?" she asked. "For everything. For the skill. For the fire. For saving me." Mai Lin smiled, and it was the first time he had seen her truly smile, a warm, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I did not come here to save you, Arthur. I came here to build a life. Saving you was just necessary maintenance." Arthur laughed, a sound that hadn't been heard in that house for years. He stood up and walked to her, offering his hand. "Merry Christmas, Mai Lin." She took it, her grip strong and sure. "Merry Christmas, Arthur." As they stood by the window, watching the moonlight dance on the snow that covered their land, Arthur realized that the debt was just money, and the winter was just a season. The true wealth of the ranch was standing right beside him. He had expected a wife to serve him, but fate had sent him a warrior to lead him. And as the wind whispered through the pines, no longer a threat but a song, Arthur knew that Ironwood Ridge would not just survive, it would become a legend. This story of Arthur and Mai Lin reminds us that our greatest strength often lies in the partnerships we build and the openness to see value where we least expect it. True love is not found in subservience or rigid roles, but in shared burdens and mutual respect, where two people combine their unique skills to overcome insurmountable odds. Like the harsh winter that tested the ranch, life's challenges are best weathered when we embrace resilience and trust in one another's strengths. By letting go of his pride and accepting Mai Lin's expertise, Arthur not only saved his legacy but found a connection deeper than he could have imagined. It teaches us that family is built on the foundation of working together, forgiving past prejudices, and persevering through the darkest storms. What did you think of Arthur's decision to trust Mai Lin with the ranch's future? Do you think you would have been able to overcome the pride and prejudice of that era to save your home? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and romance in the Wild West, please subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for watching.